time is 11 o'clock. It's Thursday, 13th of November 2025. My name is Faria Ali. I'm from the Everyday Muslim Heritage and Archive Initiative. We're at the offices at Herbert Smith, Freehills, Kramer. And can I start by asking your full name and where you were born and raised?
So my name is Faria Ali. I was born in the northwest of England and I was raised in Manchester.
Okay. So can you tell me what early experiences, either in your family, community, work, what shaped your interest in justice, equality, and the kind of humanitarian work at Muslim Aid?
I think it was a lot to do with the fact that when I was growing up, my parents made a very conscious effort every summer to take us back to Pakistan. So we would go back to essentially my father's village. And whilst we were very comfortable there, I think at a very young age, I saw that not everybody else was like that. And I saw the disparity. And I remember one of my earliest memories of those sorts of trips is being around 6 and wondering if I should feel a little bit guilty about the fact that, everything felt quite comfortable for me, which looking back for a 6-year-old is a big thing to think, but it stuck with me. And I really appreciate my parents having taken the effort to give us that sort of exposure, because I think it was a pretty formative experience for me. And so I knew that wherever I ended up, as I was growing up, wherever I ended up, a big part of what I would want to do was to help change that in whatever way I could. So in my journey to sort of becoming a lawyer, there have been various detours where I've done that work in a more meaningful way. For example, when I've spent time working with the UN. And again, that gave me exposure to a lot of hardship and difficulty. And so I think it's those sorts of experiences which mean that even with a busy day job, I want to be doing the sort of work that Muslim Aid are doing.
So how did your education and early legal career influence your understanding of service and social responsibility? Or did it?
I think it did, in the sense of, again, I was fortunate in the sense that I think I came from a place of privilege. I did my undergrad at the University of Oxford, I did my master's at the LSE, but I was still spending my summers in Pakistan either doing voluntary work or work on a pro bono basis. And I went straight from university into a role at the UN. And again, it was not so much the education, but I think it was the disparity between my lived experience of being a student here or being a lawyer here, and then going out and seeing that there is, that there is so much hardship out there.
And were there any particular mentors that inspired you?
I'm sure there were lots along the way, but I go back to, for me, my biggest mentors in terms of instilling values in me, in terms of, I think, course correcting when I might have been about to steer off piste, have been my parents. I don't remember a time when my parents were kind of wholly focused on their own lives. There's always been a sense of community and a sense of giving back, and that being a necessary part of how you go about living your life. And again, I think that's really shaped my sort of outlook on the work that I do with Muslim Aid.
You've mentioned work with the United Nations. You've also worked at the British Cross. What lessons from those kind of experiences have stayed with you? Anything in particular?
I think sometimes the fact that values get lost in an organisation. So you might be touting values like doing the right thing by those who are in difficulty, but that's not the way that it translates. And the people in an organisation are fully responsible on a day-to-day basis for living out those values. I think the responsibility almost lies with the individuals who collectively form an organisation. And I'm not sure that I necessarily saw those values being lived out in some of those organisations. And to be honest, I think, given I did it at such an early stage in my career, I found it quite disillusioning. And that's perhaps one of the reasons I came back to private practice, because the UN and the British Red Cross and other organisations that I worked with at the time were not, as a 21-year-old, 23-year-old, what I thought that they would be. But again, I think that then means that in doing what I do now, I carry with me a real sense of responsibility in terms of living out the values of Muslim Aid, whether that's the excellence, the khidmah, the ihsan, whatever it is. I try to live those values meaningfully.
And have your experiences, law and advocacy, shaped your approach to governance and leadership at Muslim Aid?
Yes, but I think if they have, it's almost been quite subconscious. I think I was the person I was before coming to the law. And I think that's almost shaped the way that I've approached my career, as opposed to my career shaping me in a sense. I've always been very clear on what my values are. And I've tried to be a lawyer that lives out those values. And I've brought exactly the same, I hope, to the work that I'm doing in the advocacy space with Muslim Aid or with other organisations that I'm affiliated with.
And can you tell me how and when you became involved with Muslim Aid?
Yes, so it was the summer of 2020, so kind of halfway through COVID, if you will. And I was approached by Muslim Aid. And I was slightly reluctant, if I'm honest, at the time, but I'm so glad that I did join then.
Can I ask why you were reluctant?
So Muslim Aid is an organisation that I grew up with. The brand is incredibly powerful because I think people like myself have sort of come up with it. The organisation's been around doing some brilliant work for now 40 years. But I was also conscious that the organisation at the time had recently gone through, some issues with the Charity Commission, an investigation. And I wasn't really sure where the organisation was at. So I was reluctant, but I had a conversation with various people, and actually the way that I then started to view it is this is an opportunity to do something to essentially revive the organisation.
So just to build on that, I was going to ask you what motivated you to join the board and particularly take on the role of vice chair?
I think what motivated me to join was, frankly, I think the day job is, so I'm a corporate lawyer, and I work with big corporates and they have CSR programs, but day to day in terms of what I was doing, I wasn't feeling completely fulfilled. Or didn't think I was doing enough to give back. So I was looking for some outlet or some way of getting involved with a charity or some sort of cause. So I guess when the opportunity came along, there was already something there in terms of wanting to get involved. Like I said, the reluctance was around what was happening at the charity at the time.
So you've mentioned growing up knowing about Muslim Aid. How has your perception evolved since you became part of the leadership?
I've realised how much hard work it takes to run an organisation of this scale, how much dedication, difficult decision making it takes to stay true to what it is that you've set out to do. Particularly, I think, given the context in which we're now operating. I'm sure we'll come on to talk about it.
In what ways have you been able to apply your legal and human rights background to strengthen Muslim Aid's strategic direction and accountability?
So I think one of the issues that essentially got Muslim Aid into the trouble that it was were issues around governance. And that's something that we have had to think hard about in terms of what is it that we're getting wrong, and then translate that into actual change on the ground. And that second part is quite hard to do. So I think my legal background gives me a very strong sense of this is the way it should be done. I think the implementation of that has been a personal growth journey for me, because it's hard work.
Again, leading on from that, what have been the biggest strategic shifts or governance developments since you've been in the vice chair role?
So we've had a complete overhaul, in a sense, of our strategy, and we have a vision for 2030. I think the key shift within that has been the Muslim Aid that I grew up with, in my mind at least, was very much an organisation that helped people really in their hour of need. In the moment that the crisis struck, Muslim Aid would be one of the first organisations in the areas they operate to respond. And since Muslim Aid was founded 40 years ago, there are a number of other organisations which have come up and are actually doing that work quite effectively. So that leads to the question, what is it that Muslim Aid could be doing over and above that work? Because that's still work we want to be doing. And sort of having gone through that thought process, where we have landed is that strategically we would like to shift from immediate disaster relief work to doing more work that is in the sustainable development space. So the way that we think about it, or I think about it, is we don't just want to be there when crisis strikes. We want to be there before, we want to be there during, and we want to be there after an issue to help rebuild lives. And I think that change in outlook in terms of where we would like the organisation to be in 5 years is probably the key shift in terms of strategy.
So you joined in 2020, in the middle of COVID. What challenges during that time and what lessons continue to guide the organisation today?
I think, like with a lot of other organisations, small, large, there were definite operational challenges. But I think, again, like with other organisations, we bounced back from that, we adapted, and we continued to do the work we do abroad. I think the key legacy, in a sense, of COVID for us is the lasting impact that has had in terms of cost of living crisis. I think a lot of people at that time sort of dipped below the line, as it were, and unfortunately have stayed there, even within the UK. And so I think that led us to become more UK focused. So we now have a number of programmes in the UK, which, you know, the genesis of those programmes, or us turning towards those programmes, was COVID.
And how do you ensure transparency and integrity in decision making, particularly when it comes across international contexts?
An organisation, I think, sort of repeating what I said earlier, but an organisation is the sum total of the people in it. And so to live out the values, each and every individual within an organisation needs to act with integrity, needs to be transparent in terms of what they're doing. And as a board, we have been very clear that those values are extremely important to us. And where that's required difficult decision making, we've acted on it to make absolutely clear that these are the values that we intend to live by.
How do you see Muslim Aid contributing to the broader narrative around British Muslim civic engagement?
I see it now very differently to how I perhaps would have responded a few years ago. So Muslim Aid, the individuals that make it up, I think could afford to be a little bit more passive in terms of civic engagement. I think given the socio-political developments, for want of a better phrase, now mean that I think we are very conscious that we need to be more proactive. And so to make that more concrete, one of the things we realised with the crisis in Gaza is we can have all of the donations from all of the donors. We can have, we can then use that to buy various things. What we can't do is get it into the country to the people who need it. And that, I think, really brought home to us the importance of proactive advocacy, civic engagement, being on the front foot when it comes to these things, rather than, sort of in the moment of the crisis, realizing there were things that we could have done better.
So how has the board navigated external challenges? Again, following from that question, especially from the rise of Islamophobia and global conflict, and it's increasing, I'm assuming, the scrutiny of Muslim charities. How did that work for you?
I think we had two options. We had the option to retreat, or we had the option to respond with openness. And we have definitely chosen to do the latter. And the other choice we had was to acquiesce or comply, versus speaking with authenticity and honesty about some of the issues, which are difficult things to talk about. But again, we've chosen that difficult path because it's the right thing to do. And I keep coming back to the values, but I do that because they are so important in terms of guiding how we as a board try to conduct ourselves. And we're very conscious of the fact that unless we behave in that way, when difficult decisions need to be made, we make those decisions, we're not going to be providing the right steer to the organisation. So that's the sort of approach we've come at it with. In terms of how we've then played that out, we have always been an organisation that has worked across borders, across faiths. And I think that is the strongest, most robust response that we can provide to Islamophobia, making very clear that we are not the demons that we are sometimes painted out to be.
So what does good governance mean to you in the context of a faith-based charity?
I think we are extremely lucky in terms of the parameters and guidance that we can draw on from our faith. And one of our values, excellence, for example, I think is integral to what it means, at least to me, to be a good Muslim. Because faith for me is not about the ritualistic element almost. For me, it's more about how do I go about conducting myself day to day. And so for me, that's the connection between the being Muslim and the good governance. I guess my moral compass or my playbook when it comes to a difficult question or how I should go about running an organisation, at the very foundation of that is my faith and my Muslim values.
Thank you. And how have you approached ensuring diversity, inclusion, and ethical leadership within your role?
I think, again, by trying to walk the walk. So when I joined the board, we had Sarah on, who was another female. But otherwise, it was a lot of older South Asian men. And since then, we've come a long way. I give a lot of credit to the board for acting with openness to suggestions around, look, we really need to have a think about this. If 50% or more of our donor base are women, then we need to have a think about making sure that's reflected on the board. And we're now a gender-balanced board. We are very conscious when, for example, we are filling vacancies, that we try to mirror our donor base. And that's important to us because we don't want to think in a particular way that comes from the sort of group think of a similar set of people being together. What we want to do is to be able to serve not just our beneficiaries, but the donors, and to give them what they need. So, long way of saying, we're very conscious of the value that diversity brings, but then we've taken that, we've actually tried to act on it.
And how can Muslim Aid continue to create a culture that empowers staff and volunteers while remaining true to its faith-inspired values?
I think the answer is almost in the second part of the question, which is I think if we are true to our faith-inspired values, that in and of itself is enabling for an organisation. And this can all sound sort of quite theoretical, but it was only last week that we had a board meeting where a difficult issue came up, and we have non-Muslims on the board. And actually one of them said, look, I don't think this amounts to conduct which we should be warning somebody for. And all of the women on the board turned around and said, but as a Muslim woman, I would feel incredibly uncomfortable with that. And as a Muslim organisation, we need to be holding ourselves to sort of standard, which goes over and above what perhaps we would expect somewhere else. And a decision was made on the basis of that. So, the values piece at Muslim Aid is something that we as a board take very seriously.
Thank you. Are there any projects or partnerships that you've particularly been proud of supporting during your time as either a trustee or vice chair?
This response actually is very personal to me, in the sense that I've been working in the city for coming up to 10 years. And a couple of years ago, when the floods in Pakistan hit, that was an opportunity to reach out to the Pakistani diaspora within the city and to bring them together to raise funds for the cause. And we managed to fill the room with nearly 400 lawyers, which for me was incredible. So I think in terms of, particular partnerships, it feels really special to me that we can partner with diaspora communities in that way, because it tells me that as a community, we've come a long way. And there is a sort of critical mass of us now in the city, which means if we care about something, we can make change. So the promise and potential, I think, of that partnership with diaspora communities, particularly within professional space that sometimes in the past has felt quite lonely, I think is really encouraging.
Thank you. How can Muslim Aid leverage its network across legal, humanitarian and interfaith partners to achieve even greater impact? Or how should they?
I think by having a very clear value proposition. I think by really understanding who we are, what we intend to do, and then doing that, I think you build trust and credibility with partners, any of the ones that you've named. And I think that sort of trust and relationship that you get is the basis for great things going forwards.
Looking back on your journey with Muslim Aid, what has been the most meaningful about the experience for you?
I think going back to visit some of the places that I, as a child, went to and saw and was so impacted by, going back with Muslim Aid and knowing that I am doing what I can to sort of move the dial on things. So every year I make a point of trying to go out to one of our country offices and sort of seeing the various programs that we have there. And one of the places I've been to is Pakistan. So going and seeing the work that Muslim Aid has done on the ground there feels really quite special to me.
Kind of a full circle moment.
Yes.
What do you think the defining priorities for Muslim Aid will be in the next 5 to 10 years?
So in the next 5 years, we're really clear on what those are. The first one is around uplifting communities, and the other priorities work backwards from that. How are we going to make that happen? So in order to uplift communities, you need the money to do it. So our second priority is around being more innovative when it comes to income generation. And that's very much a work in progress. We've made changes, but there is more that we could be doing on that. And then in order to raise that money, or in order to build trust with our donors, there needs to be very effective communication. So that, again, is one of our priorities in terms of how we're going to make the uplifting communities happen. We need to communicate better with our donor base to make sure that they, first of all, feel willing to give, and second of all, can see where we're spending what they've trusted us with. So in the next 5 years, the heart of, I think, what we're trying to achieve is implementing those three sort of strategic priorities.
And how much of that work will be in the UK?
I can't give you a figure, but a meaningful amount of it. So we as a board, internally at least, have sort of set ourselves a target in terms of how much we would like to be spending in the UK. But it's not just about spending, it's about the impact that we have. And so we want to be doing more and more. I guess we don't want to be doing more and more, we probably want to be doing less and less, but there is a need to do more and more, I should say. And some of that is, the really basic stuff that we do, for example, with feeding the hungry. But some of it, I think, is our programs around mental health, which perhaps other organisations don't really think about. And so, again, we see a space for us to be doing some meaningful work there in the UK.
Thank you. How do you view Muslim Aid's contribution to shaping the next generation of Muslim and minority leaders in the charity sector?
I want to see it as an organisation that acts as a role model for how things should be done. And I think that is a shift that we have made, even when it comes to things like a gender balance board. So, for example, when we've gone out and we've been in a room with other organisations, they have told us that we are doing things differently. And in that sense, I think we're leading by example. The other thing that I hope is that for the younger generation coming through, the fact that we have made that change, the fact that we reflect their thoughts and views on where money should be going, I think is, again, another way of acting out change, which I hope will inspire people going forwards.
And what advice would you give to future trustees, especially women stepping into the leadership roles in faith-based and humanitarian organisations?
Don't doubt yourself. You absolutely have value to bring to the table. And if you're not at that table, decisions will be made that will impact you, but that you won't have contributed to. And it's often not an easy decision, and it's often not an easy thing to do. Being completely honest, when I joined the board, I found the dynamic as a South Asian woman with, again, a few older South Asian men, quite a difficult one. But I'm glad that I was brave enough, even during those moments, to speak with what I thought was authenticity, and it landed well. So I hope that's an example of how things can play out.
And is there anything that you would now look back on and think, oh, I'd do that differently?
Yes. I think we need to be even bolder in terms of the change that we expect from ourselves. And I sometimes wonder if we are not ambitious enough. So when we were shaping the strategy, perhaps that's something I should have been more outspoken about.
Thank you. What do you want future generations of Muslim Aid staff and donors to take from the legacy you and the other founders have created?
I want them to view Muslim Aid as an organisation that can be trusted And I also want them to view Muslim Aid as an organisation in the way that I saw it when I was growing up, which is this organisation is kind and compassionate and above all here to serve people who need it. I think that legacy of genuine service to others is incredibly important, and I really hope that that's something we as a board are building.
Can you briefly describe the situation the world was in that motivated you to join Muslim Aid?
Well, it was during COVID, so it was an incredibly lonely and isolating time. And it also was a time, I think, when we all felt quite helpless in a way that we're not used to. So it brought home some of the challenges in a way that other people face, I think, very close to us, and made me feel at least very vulnerable in the moment. And so I think those are the key sort of things that I remember about the time when I joined.
I think I've covered most of the questions I wanted to ask. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Something I might have missed?
No, but when I was, it's not something that you've missed, but I think it's something that I would want to put on the record for myself, which is I really do feel quite privileged to be doing what I'm doing. And in sort of reflecting on some of the questions that you'd put to me ahead of the interview, that really came home to me in a really strong way. So maybe let's end there.
Just to finish off, I'm just going to ask you the last question, and it's kind of an open kind of question really, but
Yeah.
What kind of world do you want to see?
It's a big question. I want to see a world where everybody has the opportunity to become the best version of themselves. So I think I've been afforded that privilege, maybe not to become the best version of myself, but I've had people open doors for me. I've had an incredible amount of opportunity, whether that's been as a result of my education or the organisations that I work with. And I am very conscious of the privilege that comes with that. But I want that for everybody else. I don't want not having food on the table to be the reason why you don't go to school, and not going to school being the reason why you end up living a life of hardship. So I think that opportunity piece is incredibly important.